back in the height of 2020, when everybody was, buried in a hole, play Animal Crossing. Interesting time, right? Someone in my Discord group chat made a post saying, hey, I think you would like to show Over the Garden Wall. Here's the list of people who are in it. I mean, you had the likes of Elijah Wood, Christopher Lloyd, John Cleese, very respectable people, right? Well, that message was not addressed to me. It was addressed to somebody else. But I saw that and I was like, well, that looks interesting. I'm just going to be like lurking, reading these messages, them talking about this show. That was 2020 when I read that message. Now, cut to 2023. I'm sitting alone in my room, bored as hell. And I'm like, I want to watch something. What do I watch? And I'm like, let's check my watch list. Boom. Over the Garden Wall pops up. And I'm like, let's give it a watch. And it forever changed my life. Now I'm stuck with the curse of watching this every year, once a year, because it's amazing. It's perfect. Even if there's anything bad about this show, like there could be one tiny bad thing about the show, I'm not going to say it, because to me, Over the Garden Wall was perfect, down to the last minute detail. I absolutely love and cherish this show. It came out in 2014. I was like, how did I miss this? I need more, right? So without further ado, I wanted to go back and rewatch it. This is my first time rewatching it. Since then, I have gotten people to watch this show. They've agreed to me how amazing it is. So let's do something different for this magical time of year of spoopy season. And let's revisit the time of the Garden Wall. Because I just bought the DVD. And after scouring my house for a DVD player for about 15 minutes, I finally got one. We'll be using an Xbox One today. So let's get this party started. Episode 1, The Old Grist Mill. So like right off the bat, episode 1 just sets up everything perfectly through song. We have Greg's frog, R.I.P. Jack Jones, singing this beautiful tune while, it's all like, how the gentle wind, as autumn's color, that's all. It's like, it's just the vibe of it really gives off. It's this fall, baby. And then you see this whole world starting to build, and you're getting these little bits of like what is to come. And then you immediately pop in, you see our two main characters, and you're like, wow, these couple little like, mystical looking fantasy token looking kids just walking in the forest, and they meet Christopher Lloyd. And I have to say, the best part of this entire show is Greg. This is the best part of the show. He's like my favorite character. Anytime he's on screen, he's just so funny. And in this episode, he says one of my favorite lines ever: "You have beautiful eyes." It's so funny. And then the part where Christopher Lloyd's like, you gotta watch out for the beast. The beast thingy creature, this creature comes in, and Christopher Lloyd's character, the woodsman, is just trying to fight it. And then because of Greg, he like falls over and just like passes out. And then Greg's just trying to hit it with like a little stick. And then he's like, candy camouflage. Oh my God. This is peak. This is just peak writing right here. But this first episode, it does really well to set up the entire story. I mean, it sends you right into action. Like if I were to write a D&D campaign, I would solely like take notes from how they're writing it, like, because it is kind of confusing what they're doing. Why are these here? But I when I first watched it, I didn't question it. I wish I made this kind of content when I first watched it, so I can tell you exactly like how I felt when I first watched it. I can always tell you what I remember. And I remember being like, I'm not actually questioning why these kids are here. They're on this adventure, and this is cool, right? And I love that the woodsman kind of gives them both like their own little kind of quest in a way. In the sense that, like, first of all, let me say this: Wart, he was an op. From the minute you see him on screen, he's an op. He's just hating on his brother Greg. He's just trying to have fun. He's an op. He's like doing this projection. And I love what the woodsman tells him, because Wart tries to blame Greg on some things, and the woodsman's like, no, he's your younger brother. You are the eldest. He is your responsibility. Like, Greg is just a child. He doesn't know any better. The woodsman tells him, like, you need to be responsible and like learn this responsibility, basically. So like that's kind of where Wart's journey starts, and throughout the rest of the series, we'll talk about this later, we'll see the change and growth through that, right? And then Greg, he kind of has his own little quest, which is, hey, name that frog, and that frog is your that you have to take care of that frog now. And then Greg gives the great joke, I'm gonna name this frog Wart. He's like, and his brother's like, that's kind of confusing. Well, I'm gonna name you Kitty. God, Greg is the best. Episode 2, here we go. Hard times at the Huskin' Bee. Straight off the beginning in episode 2, Greg is being Greg, as always. Just going. And then they find Beatrice, and he's like, if you help me, I'll Beatrice is a talking bird, if you don't know. But see, like I said, and they introduced her in the first episode, but like, like I said, this show's so magical that I didn't question I just assumed like, oh, this is just a magical show. There's not much to it, right? Let's not question it. That soon gets turned upside down in a few episodes later. But then Beach is like, can you help me? I'll do your favor. And Greg's like, oh, I get a wish? Turn me into a tiger. It doesn't have to be a magical tiger. But I remember when I first watched this, I was like, oh, Beach is a talking bird. She seems, very chill. My perspective on that has changed quite a bit knowing how this story goes. But in my first watch, I'm like, Beach is just, she's just like, I'll help you guys. And I'm like, oh, she seems chill. But I will say Wart had an instinct in this moment. And this is one time I will, I guess, agree with Wart that like, I don't know, they seems kind of suspicious. I mean, and now rewatching it, Beatrice, she's kind of like, she is pushy a little bit. She's like, let's ditch your brother, Greg, But then Greg starts talking about waffles and then he steps on a pumpkin. So, that ends that conversation right there. But it is kind of weird how it seemed Wart had an instinct about Beatrice being a little like, oh, you're taking us to like fairy godmothers in the woods or whatever. That's a little odd or whatever. But now that he's with these like pumpkin people, he's like, oh, they seem fine. And then Beatrice is like, these guys are weird. And so it was a little interesting flip there. But yeah, I remember when I first watched this, I was like, yeah, there's something weird is gonna happen here. It's like, I don't know what yet, but something is gonna weird. I mean, you've got these talking pumpkins. He literally makes the joke, they're a cult, basically. But after getting confronted with, it was Enoch, I believe is the leader, they get sentenced to just a few hours of manual labor, which I think is the funniest punishment, because like this show gives this eerie vibe that like all these pumpkin cult is gonna like cook them up and make them to pumpkin pies or something. And he's like, nope, a few hours of manual labor, and then boom, yeah, that's it. And what I find funny about them being in manual labor is that they put him in balls and chains, and they look so happy doing just simple chores. I don't know why, something about that just, it makes me smile. And it's got this beautiful music that's like, patience is the night, Another classic Greg moment is when they're doing their manual labor and he's digging a hole. They're digging holes, and it's like, maybe what are we digging these holes for? I don't know. And then Greg's like, I found treasure. Oh, look, you found treasure. And then he's a skeleton. I love Greg so much. He's he's a silly little guy. Silly little guy. But I'm not really sure what the lesson of episode 2 was about. I guess, not judging people's weird customs, because like the whole time they think they're in danger, but they're not. But then again, I don't blame these like kids for being a little cautious about this creepy pumpkin cult. But yeah, they just have their own customs, and that's about it really. But what I found very eerie, what Enoch said at the end, he's like, he lets them go. Like, he's like, yeah, I'm not holding you against your will. You did your time and you can go. You did your community service, manual labor or whatever, right? And he tells Wirt, are you sure you don't want to stay? And he says, no, I'm leaving, right? And eerie thing that Enoch says, like, okay, you'll join me someday, which, because the pumpkin people are skeletons, it's just alluding to the fact that like, hey, someday you'll die and you'll be here with us. And that is an eerie thing that Enoch says. And like I said, beautiful writing of this show. Beautiful writing. Episode 3, School Town Follies. I remember this episode very well. This episode's already just like very chaotic. I mean, Beatrice is like roasting Wart, and we have this teacher who's like just dumping her baggage on these little woodland creature kids. They're playing with 2 old cats. There's like a gorilla chasing them. It's crazy. But we get the best song in one of the best songs in the entire series. Potato and molasses. Yeah, basically the moral of this episode was, and I'm probably, you're gonna hear me praise Greg the whole time, so get used to it at this point. Yeah, Greg is amazing, and he was like, this episode was like, I guess about the school system, and like, oh, we can't have fun in school, but also like, it was fun that saved the school. They had a little band concert, just singing along, and they raised money to save the school. It was so sweet and beautiful. And then I'm happy for the teacher. She reunited with her old Jimmy, and it was a beautiful moment. He was stuck in the gorilla costume, everybody was scared of him. They didn't want to help him, maybe that's another lesson in life. Don't be always scared of people. Help them out. They may be different than us, right? But yeah, Greg was the best. He found that joy and happiness and fun is what really saved everything. And sometimes in life, that is the best thing you can do, is just to, have a little fun in life. Don't let people put you down. Don't let them tell you otherwise. Don't be like Wart and just be a sheep with his little dunce hat in the corner. Episode 4, Songs of the Dark Lantern. So this episode was a drastic shift from the last episode, and that's one thing. Another great thing about this show was last episode was just this fun little episode of them saving the school. Now we start off the bat, it's dark, it's rainy, they hitchhike a ride on this little cart, and it's spooky, it's creepy, it's eerie, menacing, Greg finds a duck and he's like, banana duck nut bread. I don't know, something like that. But right off the bat, another great song is about to pop up here in a minute. So yeah, they enter like this inn tavern thing, you know. Beatrice gets hit with a broom. She deserved that. You know, and then we get one of my favorite songs is for like a little 10-second clip. I'm the highwayman, I steal your shoes. It's so random. It's just so like, but also like it makes sense within the context of this world, because like there's so much random mystery to this place that like they've set it up to where like I didn't question that watching. Like I said, I've said this before, I don't question these things at the moment. Just yeah, the high man steal your shoes, yeah, that makes sense in the confines of this world where there's talking pumpkin skeletons and a school for animal children. Yeah, that makes sense. The highwayman's gonna steal your shoes. But after the highwayman does his song, everybody claps, and it makes me wonder if every time like a new person comes in, or just every night the highwayman sings his song and everyone's like, yeah, the highwayman's gonna sing his song tonight, oh my gosh, like is he like the local bard that's just singing tunes everybody? What does the highwayman mean? Is he just a robber on the side of the street? I guess that's what I mean. He's gonna steal your shoes. But yeah, digging deep into the lore of this world, the highwayman has sung this song before. Just judging by the claps, he's the local bard. These tavern people were very musical. There's a lot of musical. There's like 3 musical numbers. But we get more lore in this episode. One being, we learned that Greg and Wart are stepbrothers, half brothers. Their mother remarried, and does that make them stepbrothers? No, that makes them half brothers. Yeah. Their mother remarried and had another child. So later on, I do feel like from that information, if I remember correctly, I think one of the reasons why I'm commentating as I'm watching this, so bear with me as trying to remember things. But if I remember, I believe that is maybe some reason why Wart has resentment to Greg, because they're not like full brothers. You know, family dynamics could be always weird, right? So, and some more lore is we also see more of this Beist a little bit, because they think the woodsman is somewhat is related to the Beist, and the woodsman does have this thing that's following him and gives more lore about his lantern, like what's going on there. And then also we get Fred the horse, and I love that Fred waited a while to reveal that he could talk. Before it was just like, oh, it's just a random horse that's just going, you know. And I love that the voice of Fred is Fred Stoller, a very iconic voice I remember hearing a lot in my childhood. Episode 5, Mad Love. This episode jumps right into this whole new storyline. We don't even see how the group gets to this mansion with this guy who's like his crippling loneliness because he just has all this money in this big old house with like, I guess, no one to share it with, which is, you know, a whole other aspect of life that we could explore. But you know, I don't need to beat that lesson home to everybody. I think you get the idea here. But another one of my favorite lines to say here is basically they're here because Beatrice is like, we need money, but that's like stealing. And it's like, well, we already stole a horse. It's like, we didn't steal a horse. Fred came along with us. Like, it's like Fred is a talking horse who can do whatever he pleases. And then Fred's just like, I want to steal. It was so out of pocket that the horse is like, yeah, let's steal. We're going to steal from this wealthy old man. Like, but like with this story of this wealthy old man, I feel like every episode could literally be its own like movie short story. So every episode so far in the series pretty much is its own little story that ties in together. It is just a series of like almost short stories that tie into this grand scheme of adventure and journey. And every one of them, I could honestly see it flesh out into like a much larger production, because in this episode already we have this old guy who is like, I guess he's fallen in love with this ghost, and they're to go look at the ghost, right, in this portrait. But he's making all these comments about like, I don't want to go look at the portrait because I'm scared of what if there actually is no ghost. What if I'm just a crazy old senile man in this big lonely mansion? And like that little snippet of that line, which was like 2 sentences or whatever, you could expand that into its own whole little story. And what's one of the other beautiful things I do love about this show is every episode there's 2 or 3 little lines that they just kind of like dip your toe in real quick, and it's like, wow, you could take that little snippet, really stretch it out into something else entirely. I feel like each episode is just me taking a bite of something really good, just like, that's good, I just want another bite, you know, like when you're opening a bag of like chips and you just can't stop eating them. It's every episode is just like that. Let's open another bag, keep eating these chips, let's scarf it down. Delicious. But moving on, this episode does give us more about Beatrice and Wart's character. And another great thing about this show is the little like I said, it's the little breadcrumb, or I guess the candy crumb trail that, like Greg did in the beginning. It's just it's literally like Hansel and Gretel vibes of just, I'm going to keep feeding you these little bits of information so I can like watch your little brain connect the pieces together, So we learned that Beatrice was once a human, right? And then she was like cursed, and that's the whole reason she's on this journey to begin with. And her and Wart have this connection, talking to each other and just getting to know each other a bit more. And we kind of learn more about Wart's character in the sense of like, he thinks he's weird. He's like, I have a crush on a girl, which when I first watched this, I thought maybe he's like starting to like have a crush on Beatrice, which, she's a bird, but, finds out she's a girl, I guess. So is it really that weird? It's not the weirdest thing I've seen in the show so far to happen, but honestly, that's what I thought he was talking about. But you learn that he, he like does poetry. For some reason, he knows a lot about like French ricotta decor or whatever. One thing I will say, Beatrice is like, I don't think that stuff you do is weird. She's like, well, maybe the poetry's weird. But like, for the most part, those are just character traits about you. And for the most part, Ward is kind of like, he worries a lot. He's kind of, it seems like he's not very confident of himself. He doesn't really, he's not a free thinker like Greg is. Greg just goes with the flow and just is having a good time. Ward just seems like he's worrying about everything. He's overthinking anything. And you can see that like, there's these things that he thinks is weird about himself, but Beatrice tells him like, no, these are pretty normal things. And I'm sure we've all felt this way before, where like, there's things that we think that we do that's like, oh, it's weird that I do these things. But most of the time, like all of us they're just character traits we have. They're not weird. We may think they're weird and we may get insecure about them, but they're not. And you have to like learn to accept that thing about yourself. So, and that's another journey that Ward has to go through in this show, is just learning to like, hey, I'm not weird. Everything's gonna be fine. Just need to just chill, He worries too much. But the crazy part about this episode, and I guess the title is very fitting for this episode, is the whole part of the crazy old man thinking there's a ghost in this house. Turns out there wasn't no ghost. There was just another lady there who thought he was a ghost, and so they just thought they were both ghosts, like practically gaslighting each other to think that their mansions are haunted, when in fact their mansions were both so big that they just connected together, and they both were like scared and like falling in love with their like quote unquote ghost. But it all has had a beautiful ending. But one of my favorite parts is whenever like the old man is getting a little weird about it, and he's like, I think I'm mad, I'm crazy, and like, and then Fred is like, he's insane, he stole the mansion and everything, and then the horse is like, I'm gonna get an honest job. He's like repenting for his sins, and then the old man's like, these hands done to get this money. In the end of all, they needed 2 cents to ride the ferry later, and they get the 2 cents from the lovely couple who like has a tea company now. And we say goodbye to Fred, one of my favorite characters in this entire show. He was in 2 episodes, but sad he's gone. He's now a horse that delivers tea pretty much. But then they get the 2 cents. Like the whole episode was about them getting 2 cents so they can ride the ferry. And then Greg just throws it in the fountain. At the bottom of the fountain, there's just a stack of money, and they just like, well, we don't have 2 cents now. Greg's like, yeah, that old man pegged me the wrong way, so that's why I threw the money down there. I don't want this money anymore. It just goes to show you can do a lot of work for nothing. I still cherish Greg as a character though. What he did was ridiculous, and if I was in that actual situation, I'd be like probably pissed. But I think the episode was more to focus on Beatrice and Ward's characters, to kind of give them time to flesh them out and see what's more than meets the eyes, It still was funny though that Greg dropped it. Like I said, if I was in that situation, I'd probably be pissed, but I'm not. I'm just someone watching it from the TV. So episode 6, Lullaby in Frogland. Ooh, ribbit. So in this episode, already Beatrice is being weird, and if I remember correctly, I think I know why she's being weird, but we'll get to that when we get to that, right? But they're on this boat with these frog people, and I love that Greg just keeps like changing the name of the frog, and he names him George Washington, and he's like, George Washington needs clothes, he's naked, the president's naked. And then they get chased by these frog police because they snuck on the ferry without paying, because Greg threw the money in the fountain or whatever. There's 2 bits in that chase scene that make me laugh. Is there's like these 2 frogs taking a picture, and they like kind of crash into them, and then they drop tadpoles, and it's like the babies, and then like these tadpoles are just flopping on the ground and crying, and then they're in the captain's area. Greg just stops to salute the captain, which like the animators didn't have to animate that, but they did, and it added extra to this little chase scene. And then the police frogs chasing them also salute. So pure genius on their part. But moving on, in this episode, Ward does gain a little confidence in himself as Beatrice is trying to sabotage their way to get to Adeline's house. Like I said, they get chased by the frog police. They're disguised in the band, and one of the bassoon players gets kicked out, and so it's like, hey, why don't you play bassoon, Ward? It's similar to clarinet, kind of, in a way, and then Ward's like, no, I can't do that, it isn't similar, and and then it's like, just do it. So he does it, he's playing well, and then Mr. President, George Washington Frog, just starts singing, and it's like, over the garden wall. And it's a beautiful moment. The frogs just kind of forget that they snuck on the boat, and it's a happy moment. And that's when Wart's like, thank you, Beatrice, for like encouraging me. And deep down, Beatrice is just trying to sabotage everything and get them kicked off. And she's like, yeah, I guess you are playing. And that's when we see that Wart and Beatrice are like kind of forming a bond. And in a way, she's like trying to slow this process down because they're almost at the destination. And then we learn more about Wart. And so, like I said, I thought that he had a crush on Beatrice in the beginning, but then we learned that you hear a snippet of the story of there was this other girl that he was smitten with, and then someone else came and swooned her in. But that's when Beatrice is like, you're kind of a loser where you're from, but like here you seem to be like a hero. You seem to be somebody here. And that begs the question, like, why would you want to go back home? Here you are something. Here you've done all these cool things, you've had this all amazing adventure, and there is kind of like a moral dilemma there, I think, in a way. But because if I was in this situation and if I were to sit there and say like, hey, where I'm from, I'm kind of a loser, but here I'm something. I've made friends here. I've had these cool adventures. Yeah, it's a bit creepy here, but like here I am something. Would I choose to stay, or would I go back home and face my problems? That is a very interesting dilemma there. Do you stay somewhere where you are seen and cherished and like, wow, you're kind of a cool guy. You've gone all these great trials and tribulations. Or do you go back home, face your problems, make some real change in your own personal life? That would be a struggle to have. And this is all said in an episode about frog singing. And then on top of that, Greg's character, like I said, in the beginning, the woodsman was like, hey, take care of this frog, give it a proper name. And now the frog has his own record deal. So, and Greg has a sense of like, I'm proud of you. I raised you well. I've done all I can. A little growth for Greg there, you know? Beautiful moment. But towards the end of this episode, we get our first real tragic moment. And so in the beginning, Beatrice is kind of weird, kind of standoffish person or bird. And in this episode, like I said, she was trying to stop everything. Basically because like she was leading them to some crazy lady who wanted a child servant, which is wild. And in exchange, she would get these like scissors to help that would, because her whole family turned into birds, it would cut off their wings and like turn them to human. So that's the whole reason, this whole journey, she tricked these kids. But over time she's like grown fond of them and like she doesn't want to hurt them, you know? So we get the betrayal, you know, and she tries to go to Adeline's house first to just try to convince her to be like, hey, like take me instead. But Wart and Greg follow her, and eventually, though, the lady gets defeated by breathing in fresh air, which is a horrifying scene to watch her melt to that. But like I said, this was a sad moment because Wart and Greg do escape and they leave her behind, and she's just and Beatrice just wants to apologize and be like, I'm sorry, it's not what I meant to do. I was trying to save you, but you didn't hear me out. And it is sad. It's a very, I remember like when I watched it, I was like, what? The betrayal? Because like I in a way I didn't see it coming, but I did. But also like I didn't want to believe it, you know, because I mentioned earlier how Wart having this dilemma of like, should I stay here? So Beatrice had this dilemma of, yeah, I want to save my family, but at what cost? Beatrice was very standoffish. She seemed like she just had this one goal in mind, didn't want to make any friends, but in turn she did make friends. And she was given a choice of like, do I help my family in the cost of hurting somebody else, or do I sacrifice myself to let these people go, set them free, and continue with their journey to trying to find home? It was a dilemma. Like, I want to help my family, but also I can't just sacrifice these people I met who just only been nice to me, you know? It was a very sad moment. I just felt like the stabbing in my heart, like, oh no, not Beatrice. And then that's when Wart is like, you know, I shouldn't trust anybody. And this is one of the hardest things when you get betrayed by somebody. You know, I forgot who I was watching a video. I think it was a Matt Pat video. Don't remember the video, but I think he was talking about how statistically speaking, the world would be a better place if we all learned to trust each other. But it is very unfortunate when you lose trust in somebody. It makes you not trust people even more. And the more you don't trust people, the more you can even like get in your own head about people who are really nice and do want to help you. You just don't want to accept help from others. And it is sad to see Wart go down that journey when he's made so much progress. He's lightened up a little bit. And now from what I remember here on out, Wart kind of just gets more of a jerk. But the episode ends with just a funny moment of Greg's frog comes back and he yells Benjamin Franklin, giving him a new name. And I love the trend of giving this frog a new name. But it was a very sad episode that started out so happy. We got like 3 episodes left. Episode 7. The ringing of the bell. Ding. So I'm gonna go ahead and give you my favorite Greg quotes in this episode. One, he calls the frog Dr. Cucumber. That's funny. But they see a little barrel of turtles and he's like, we're Turtle Ridge. And then the girl, Lorna, right, is her name? They find her and she's like, what are you doing here? And he's like, we come to burgle your turts. Classic Greg right there. But this episode was, out of all the ones I remember watching, this one was like dark. It hit me pretty hard to watch because we're already seeing the fact that Wart is kind of he's kind of done with everything. He was betrayed by Beatrice, you know, the one friend that he was starting to make here. And then he meets this girl here who, like, automatically he's just like, she's kind of cute, you know? And she seems to like him back too. And they have a little moment together in this place, but not everything is as it seems in this place. The girl that they find in this little cabin, she is being watched by this weird older lady who controls her with this bell, and it seems like it's a situation where she's being held hostage and everything, and it's really creepy. But then you find out that the little girl is an evil spirit that's like gonna devour everybody's bones to smithereens or whatever. So Auntie Whispers says like, yeah, I told you so, you should have stayed away from her. So it's a real switcheroo of like, oh, I thought the old lady was eating children. No, it's the little girl who's eating children. But through the help of Greg and Dr. Cucumber, they manage to banish the evil spirit, you know. I just remember Greg's like, I command you to turn to a magical tiger. And then Ward gets it, like, I ban the spirit. At this point, like, Lorna was gonna run away with Ward, and Ward was like happy about that because he seems to like this girl, you know, for the 10 seconds that he met her. But hey, I get it, and we've all been in that situation before, right? But you know, once the spirit is gone, and Auntie Whisper is like, yeah, thank you for saving my girl, you know. But she's sad, and like, now that your spirit is gone, you have no one, you don't need me anymore. And then that's when Lorna's like, you know, I do need you, Auntie. Like, you know, I can't leave you. You're my family. And it's kind of a nice moment, but it is sad for like Ward because he's like, oh man, I really thought I, you know, had someone new to keep by my side, you know. And then Auntie Whispers gives the advice of like, stay away from my sister Adeline, she's evil. And it's like, wait, it would have been nice to know that like 3 days ago. But in the episode, we see the woodsman talking to what we assume is the Beast. And it seems that the Beast's plan is to make like the kids lose all hope. Abandon hope, ye who all enter. And in turns, the woodman is getting something out of this, like apparently keeping the soul of his daughter alive. But the woodsman's even like, I don't want to do this. Like, there has to be another way. I don't want to like trade the souls of children for this. It's just wrong. But the Beast has his ways. The ways of this dark, creepy forest. A very just unsettling episode. But it was a well-written episode, I can say that much. A good switcheroo is all we need to make some beautiful writing. Episode 8, Babes in the Wood. Greg's iconic line in this one was, must be a really fat cricket. So in this episode, Wart is like, he's getting very emo with his poetry. He's like, we're lost. And this is where I said earlier where Wart becomes more of a jerk. And he's simply, you know, Greg wants to like, wondering like, hey, we gotta get home, you know. Greg is looking for guidance from his older brother because he is the oldest, right? But then Wart has kind of lost his way through all the craziness that's happened in this over the garden wall, right? And because Wart is not, I guess, confident in himself, and he hasn't really, I guess, learned how to accept responsibility, he blames Greg for a lot of his problems. And he blames Greg for why they're here because they were goofing off and they got lost here. But like, Greg's a kid, you know, and even if they're lost, Greg still has like this positive attitude, which after watching this episode and what I believe to be, I guess, the message of the story was, so they rest and Greg has this weird dream. They're in the clouds. They're singing some song that's like the old north wind. And in the end, you know, Greg like saves this cloud village in his dream. And then this like cloud princess lady comes down and it's like, Greg, you saved my city. I'll grant you a wish. And it would have been funny though if he wished to be a magical tiger, but he didn't. He was like, I kind of like wish to go home, and you know, how do I get home? You know, I've been trying to be a leader because, like I said, Wart is trying to put the responsibility of leading to Greg. And so Greg, and in his own little journey, is like, how do I become a better leader? How do I lead better? And through all this, the lady's like, I can take you home. And here's the reason why I can take you home. Because you are true to yourself. Greg is like, well, I want to bring Wart. The lady's like, we can't take Wart. Why can't we take Wart? Wart has lost his way. He's being consumed by the forest and the beast. He can't go back with you. And that's where I was like, the reason why it seems like Greg can escape this place, because I've watched people talk about this show and break down like, I guess, the messages of it. I hear a lot of people compare it to like almost like Dante's Inferno, where like there's just this journey through like this like limbo underworld or whatever. And it is kind of like that in a sense, you know. Once you kind of like watch the whole thing, you'll understand it better. But the whole reason they're here is not because they got lost, but because there was a journey that like Wart needed to go through. And if he doesn't get to the other side without learning his lessons, he is forever stuck here. And I guess that's the metaphor of the entire show, I guess, in general. But it seems the reason that Greg is able to like, hey, I can take you home. You can get out of this place. Because it seems to me that Greg is true to himself. And through all the hardships, he was positive. He chose his own path, because Ward told times like, I need to find the path. I need to stay on the path. I need to just like get home as quick as possible. While Greg is just having the time of his life. Greg's having fun. Greg's not worrying so much. Greg is just being Greg, which is why he's the best character of this show. And so because Wart had all these expectations he was putting on himself, half the time even causing his own problems, he pretty let himself down to the point where he lost his way. He was so worried about trying to find a way that he lost a way, which is why he can't go home, because the metaphor of him going home is like, even if he goes home, he's still going to be lost. He needs to learn his lesson before he can find his way home. It's the only way he'll find his way home. I popped off there for a second, but in the end of this episode, the frog is now named Ronald. Episode 9, Into the Unknown. Greg's best quotes are, he calls an old lady a young man. Very, 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 very funny. But this episode is where I think the show separates it from being great to perfect writing. You learn that both Greg and Ward are from the modern time. And I remember when I first watched this episode, I'm like, what is happening here? Because like, to me, everything about this show, from the packaging to the marketing to whatever, I just thought it was a show about these two boys who get lost in this wood. It's like this Hansel and Gretel Grimm's Tale like story. But no, they're just these two boys who were for modern times. And then they go over the garden wall, or I guess technically the cemetery wall. But like, let's get into this episode, right? First and foremost, we know that Wart had a crush on this girl named Sarah. And I will admit, in this episode, Greg does embarrass Wart. And I think if I was in that situation, I would be like very embarrassed. But it was a situation where Greg was just trying to help his brother. And in fact, there were many times where like, if it wasn't for Greg, Wart wouldn't have done certain things. But he didn't appreciate any of it. There were so many times where Greg was just hyping Wart up to like shoot his shot, and he didn't. He just kept creating this false narrative that like, I'm not good enough for this girl Sarah. Jason Funderburger or whatever his name is, he's the great guy and all. But you look at Jason, he's just like Mape, you know. And you can tell that Sarah likes Wart. She wants to spend time with them. She's asking to spend more time with them. But no, just because Jason's around, he's like, oh, Jason's perfect. Like, how am I going to compete with that? He's just not confident in himself to just shoot a shot, to go for it. And the whole time, Greg is just like, look, I think you're a great guy. I think, you know, she would like you. Just go for it, man. But nah, he's just so in his head the whole time. And that was like Wart's problem. He had these insecurities. He wasn't confident. And because like of this frustration, a lot of times he projected that onto like Greg, which was heartbreaking to me, you know? I mean, there's a part where Sarah invites Wart to come to the graveyard to hang out, but he's like, I don't want to go because like Jason's going to be there. I think y'all need to spend alone time together, because in his head, he's already created this false narrative that like, oh, she likes Jason and I don't have a shot. But in theory, that's like not even the case, right? But they go to the cemetery, and then Sarah's like excited to see him there, you know. And if it wasn't for Greg to kind of like, you know, be like, hey, we're here, you know, he would never said, he would have never like gone there to begin with. But some cops show up, which by the way, the cops were funny in this episode, because anytime like kids were doing something, they'd be like, stop. Like there was these two kids dressed as burglars, and the cops were like, hey, you're under arrest. I'm just kidding, it's Halloween. And the whole time it's like, I'm just kidding, it's Halloween. Like they go to the cemetery, and it's like, is this some kind of like witching gathering? I'm just kidding, it's Halloween. But the kids just run anyway, because you know it's cops that are scared, right? The cops are just like wanted the kids to be safe, right? And so they climb over this wall, and in this moment, that's where Wart sees that Sarah found the tape, and Jason's like, let's listen to it. And then Wart thinks his life is over. He thinks she's gonna listen to the tape. It's gonna hate him, you know, because he put his heart and soul into this tape, playing his music, his clarinet, and I guess reading his poetry. So like I said, she hasn't even heard it yet, and he's already thinking it's for the worst. I mean, it's like when you like somebody and you text them like, hey, you want to go out sometime? And you're just sitting there waiting for that text, and it's nerve-wracking, right? And in a way, like, you know, Wart's young, he's in high school. I get it. We were all there, right? But just not having that confidence in yourself, you know? It hasn't happened yet. You don't know what's gonna happen yet. Why don't you just, you know, you got to learn to deal with it. But they fall on the other side of the wall. And like I said, in this moment, that's when we see that Wart thinks his life is over, thinks that like Sarah wants nothing to do with him, and he blames it on Greg. And you even see that part where I mentioned this over. They're not full brothers, they're like half brothers or whatever. And there's a part where he's like, it's all your fault, Greg, like you're the reason my life is over. I blame, like, it's you and your dad, like you're always like pushing me to do these things I don't want to do. And then like Greg's like, hey, like, you know, some of these things that like we talked about doing, they would actually maybe benefit you a little bit, like if you join band, because like his stepdad said, like you can spend more time with Sarah or whatever. And he was like, nope, it's that episode, it's your fault. And I'm like, wow, I can see you're projecting this hatred towards this kid's real dad onto him, and it's a very messed up thing to do. to a little kid, right? And I guess devastating part about all that is that, I don't know if it's devastating, but like Greg is still happy the whole time. No matter how much Wart treated Greg badly, he still did his best to just be positive and to just try to even help his older brother. Wart, why, man? Greg is just a national treasure. But moving on from that, this is where, like I said, people have talked about this show being like Dante's Inferno or like Limbo or whatever. And so we just finished episode 9, and I don't remember how the story ends. It's been a while. Like I said, it's been a year since I watched it. But there are theories that they actually died, because at this point they go over the wall and a train comes and they fall down, land in water. And there's a theory that they actually died and now they are in limbo. And I guess through limbo, I guess like in Dante, or even like in Dante's Inferno, they have to go through the trials of like, what happened? How did you end up here? And the only reason they end up in the situation is not because of Greg, because of Wart. Wart was so worrying all the time. Wart was just blaming other people that like now he's in limbo and he must pay for like the sins he's committed, which was this self-loathing, this putting himself down, and also not taking responsibility of his own actions and blaming others. And that's why Wart needs to go on this journey to learn, because in the end, you know, he's with Beatrice's family now after being saved from falling in this frozen like bog or whatever. And at one point Beatrice's family feeds him dirt, which I wonder if that's a metaphor for like he's dead and they're feeding him dirt, because you're eating worms and dirt, I guess, as being dead. But he learns that like, hey, I have not been nice to my brother. I haven't been helpful to him, and now I must go save him. This is the journey that he takes. He has to take. Otherwise, he's never going to learn a lesson. With that said, there's a lot of questions that I'm trying to remember about the last episodes. A lot of unknowns, you know? And with that, we even get to the last unknown. Episode 10, the final episode, The Unknown. There is so much to unpack in this episode in such a small amount of time, which is crazy how much content is fit into each one of these like 15-minute episodes. But first of all, fun little segment in the beginning is Greg is meeting the Beist, and the Beist is like, did you find the golden comb? I found this comb. That's a honeycomb. But like just the way Greg thinks is so magical. Like the Beist is like, put the sun in a cup, and then it's like, I'm just going to put this cup on this little stump and the sun's just gonna fall into it, and it's like, that's the puzzle, you solved it. Greg's mind works in mysterious ways. But you learn in this episode that the Indlewood or whatever that the woodsman needed to make the oil to light the lantern was created through the lost souls wandering into the forest and just getting stuck there, and they become the trees. I mean, you see these creepy trees with faces and like oil dripping down them in the beginning, and we see that like Greg is being turned into one of these trees. I mean, we even see at one point where Wart is kind of becoming one of these trees. And a funny part is when they find Greg, Wart and Beatrice reunite and they go find Greg, and it's like, oh no, the leaves are growing into Greg, and he like, because he coughs up leaves, and he's like, no, I just been eating leaves, which is a funny moment. And then also Frog is officially named Jason Funderburger. But yeah, we see that the trees is what makes the oil, and that comes from the souls of the lost. And the woodsman sees that, and he's like, I can't go through with it. Like, I can't believe I have been like taking souls to make this oil to keep this lantern alive. Because the whole thing, he's like, he wants to keep the lantern alive because his daughter's soul is in there. But he can't go through it. He can't go through with like ending a child's life, right? So at this point, Wart does find Greg, and the Beist is like, you can't take Greg home. He's too weak. He's gonna become a tree unless you do a deal with me. Your deal is like, take the woodsman's place. You are now the lantern bearer. You will spend the rest of your days turning this wood into oil, turning these souls into oil, so you can keep your brother alive in this lantern. And for a moment, Wart's like, I want to do it. I think I am doing it. Then Wart's like, no, that's just kind of weird. Why would I do that? He gave the most logical answer ever. And it was like, yeah, now that I really think about it, why would I do that? I'm going to just be walking aimlessly for the rest of my life, just trying to keep this lantern alive, to keep my brother alive. But like, I'm not going to even spend time with my brother. It's just going to be the potential of keeping his soul alive. And he's given that choice, but he's like, no, I'm not going to do it. I don't want to wander these woods forever. And I think this was a major point of this entire story, is that I do feel that some people can get obsessed with the past, can start to obsess about the problems, their worries, to the point where they become lost in themselves. They get so lost and they get so determined on just trying to like fix this one thing, or just never forgetting the past in a way that's healthy, that they become lost themselves. Like the woodsman, through this story, you can kind of expect that his daughter passed passed away and he has to keep her soul alive. And he's spending the rest of his life just trying to keep the soul alive in a lantern, to the point where like it's the only thing he does. He's not happy. He's not enjoying his life. He's not honoring the memory of his daughter. He's just constantly doing this thing. And in turn, you learn that his daughter's soul's not even in this lantern. It's the beast. He's keeping the beast alive. He is keeping this darkness inside him alive. And so many people do that. And what Wart learns through his entire journey is like, I can't be doing that, because the whole time Wart was worrying about his problems. He was worrying about these things that honestly, like, he was making up problems that weren't even happening, you know? And the problems he did have, he was blaming on other people. Like, he was blaming them on his brother Greg. And it wasn't until he finally owned up to his mistakes and realized, look, I have been the problem, I have been the drama, that he was like, I can move on. I can be a better person. I can be confident in myself. I can learn to take responsibility. And he was able to move on. He was able to escape the garden, the forest. He was able to escape the problems that were over the garden wall, that were in the forest. And it also helped the woodsman escape his trauma too. And in a very poetic way, because like, the beast was eluded by this creepy darkness in the forest. The way that they were able to defeat the beast, the woodsman, was by blowing out the lantern, blowing out the light, which was kind of weirdly poetic, because it was darkness that killed the beast, because the beast needed light, because it didn't have anything else, and it needed to feed off someone else's light to stay alive. And him blowing it out, it was, like I said, very poetic, very, very just beautiful writing on their part. And after the entire journey and adventure that they had, the boys wake up in the water. And this is where you can be like, maybe the entire story and journey they had was a dream. You know, maybe they were in some kind of like limbo, you know. I guess in a way it's a speculation. I don't know what the creators have said about the show. I do know what other people have talked about in the sense of this story. And, you know, they go to the hospital, they were found, and Greg's telling the entire story. Sarah's there, and she sees Wart, and she's like, you know, I don't have a tape player to play the tape you made for me. And he's like, well, he's finally confident to be like, hey, you can come back to my house and we can listen to it. He does get a little bit in his head and starts rambling, but you know, it's a happy ending. And the narrator's like, it's a happy ending for everybody. You know, the woodsman, he was scared of going back to this lonely cabin, which is why the beast was feeding off of his grieving for his daughter. And he's like, you want to be alone in that cabin, but he's there, and his daughter's there. His daughter is there. She comes back. And then you see everyone else through the journey they met. Like Fred is in the portrait with the tea people, you know, and you see Lorna with her auntie, and you see the frogs rising back from their hibernation. There's a fish fishing in the pond, you know, and then you see Beatrice. Her family's all well again. They're human again, and they're all just enjoying their life. And I remember being like, in a way, it was like kind of like sad and beautiful ending, because I guess what was sad for me is because they made all these friends and they kind of just go back to their normal life. And I guess if the childlike wonder in me would be like, it would be kind of nice and magical to stay in this place, but with everything they went through, it would be a shame that Wart did not go back to his life and apply all the lessons he learned into his life to have a better life. And I'm sure if there was ever a season 2, that we could see Wart and Greg just living a great life, and Greg puts his little rock from his rock fact thing back to the old lady's house, and it's a magical, beautiful ending. But I will say this, I don't think Over the Garden Wall needs a season 2. There are many times where a show comes out and I think it's best that it just stays like this little piece of history in television or cinema, and that's it. And it's something beautiful that I can remember and I can watch over and over again. Over the Garden Wall is just such a magical show in that sense, that it was just this little piece of short episodes that were like, I mean, this is like watching a movie, you know, it's not even that long. It's like an hour. I mean, it's like not even, like I said, it's a little over an hour, I think, altogether. But yeah, I just don't think it needs any more. It was perfect. And I remember as I was watching this, the only way I can describe how I felt watching Over the Garden Wall for the first time was like the feeling I got watching the show, to me, was people describe like when you die, that there's like almost like this euphoric sense of I can just let everything go. And that's the vibe I get watching this show, because there are themes that kind of circle around like death and like even limbo, if you want to get more into the theories of this show. And there's a sense of uncertainty, but also the sense of like, I can just let go into this fantasy realm and in a way learn about my own errors in life and overcome them. I imagine like if I were to pass away, maybe I'll go through this journey, you know, if I have like a near death experience, maybe I'll go through this little journey that in my mind what happened in like 3 seconds, and then I wake up in the hospital like, what happened? Like I went through a whole journey where I met pumpkin people and I had a frog that I kept renaming, and I met this bird lady, you know, and a horse that talked. I guess that's what I imagined it actually being like, a near-death experience, was you go through a journey, and maybe, as I'm talking, maybe that's the metaphor of the whole show, is that they have a near-death experience, and Wart learns to like appreciate life and every mistake he made. You know, dang it, I just realized that as I'm yapping here. That's crazy. And all I can say to that is like, dang, ain't that just the way? Happy Halloween, everybody. Or Samhain, whatever, however you pronounce it. Or if you're sure about El Dia de los Muertos, you know, just get something sweet. Peace out. But nobody told me Auntie Whisper was voiced by Tim Curry, the man, the myth, the legend himself, Mr. Toxic Love. You saucy minx!